The sun was just beginning to set behind the open Texas sky, painting the horizon bright shades of orange and pink as Victor drove his old rusty pickup down the dusty roads. The hum of the engine was drowned out by the rumbling guitar riffs and thundering beats coming from the 8-track player. It was 1977, and tonight was the long-awaited rock concert at Texas Motor Speedway, a legendary gathering of rebels and freethinkers. The Rolling Stones were headlining, and Victor could feel the excitement spilling through his veins, but he was even more looking forward to his passenger, Jessica. Sitting next to him, her hair fluttering in the evening breeze, Jessica, his mother-in-law, looked like a 70s rock goddess. Her blonde hair was scattered over her shoulders, a flower tucked behind her ear. She wore puffer jeans tight around her hips and a loose, flowing blouse that fluttered in the wind. Victor cast a glance at her, and his heart raced. He could hardly believe he was here, next to her, heading to the concert they both secretly dreamed of attending together. It had all started innocently enough. Jessica had always been the kind of woman who drew others to her with her easy charm. She was different from anyone Victor had ever met, especially compared to his wife, Melissa. Jessica had a rebellious streak in her, a lust for life that Victor was increasingly attracted to. Their connection had first sparked at a family barbecue a few months earlier. Melissa had gone inside to get drinks, and Victor and Jessica had shared a moment, a touch that lasted far too long, a look that spoke volumes. And those moments had only gotten bigger since then. The trip to the concert was filled with laughter. Jessica and Victor talked about everything from the bands that were performing to their favorite records. An attraction developed between them that was almost impossible to ignore. As Victor parked the car in the crowded parking lot that had been turned into a field, they both took a deep breath, realizing that the night ahead held possibilities that neither of them could have predicted. They made their way through the crowd, the smell of beer and fun in the air, mixing with the electric energy of excitement. People came from everywhere, dressed in jeans and leather, with faces flushed with freedom, surrounded by music and kindred spirits. Victor took Jessica's hand as they approached the stage. She looked back at him, her smile a combination of delight and something deeper, something that made his heart pound and his throat constrict. The concert began, and the opening band lit up the stage with lights and an explosion of sound. The bass rumbled in Victor's chest, and as the crowd began to sway and dance, he felt Jessica pressed against him. Her back was pressed against his chest, her head thrown back, her eyes closed, her body moving to the beat of the music. He wrapped his arms around her waist to keep her still. At least that's what he told himself. But when she didn't pull away, but instead melted into his touch, he realized they'd crossed the line. And, God, it was the right thing to do. The Rolling Stones took the stage to the roar of the crowd. Flashing lights danced across the sea of people, and Victor felt like the whole world had melted away. It was just the two of them. He leaned over, brushed his lips against Jessica's ear, and whispered something he couldn't even remember what. She turned her head slightly, her lips so close to his, and his dark eyes reflected his own desire. And then they kissed. It was quick, hidden under the cover of the night and the chaos around them, but it was enough to send electric shocks through his entire body. They didn't move away from each other for the rest of the concert, their hands intertwined, their bodies moving together as the music played over them. Victor knew this was wrong. He knew that if Melissa found out about it, Their world would be torn apart. But when Jessica looked up at him, with eyes filled with a mischievous light, he didn't care. In that moment, he wanted her like he'd never wanted anything. The concert lasted for what seemed like an eternity, each song flowing into the next, their rhythms and melodies woven into a euphoric tapestry of sounds and emotions. Victor could feel the sweat on his skin, smell the heady scent of Jessica's perfume mingling with the smoky air. The heat of the night enveloped them like a blanket, pulling them deeper into this moment. Music came from the speakers, and they moved in sync with each other, as if they were the only people in the place. The world around them seemed to dissolve into focus. One moment they were surrounded by strangers, swaying and dancing, and the next moment it was just Jessica and Victor, caught up in their own secret dance. Guitar solos soared, drum beats rattled, and their hands never let go of each other. Victor could feel Jessica craving his touch, her fingers intertwining with his fingers, her whole body pressed against him. It was dangerous, exhilarating, and made his heart beat like nothing else. During the slow ballad, Jessica turned to face Victor, her eyes searching his. There was a vulnerability in her gaze that he hadn't noticed before, a mute question that required no words. He pulled her closer, their foreheads touching and his hands resting on her hips. She smiled a small, wistful smile that told him all he wanted to know. They were treading dangerous water, but neither of them could stop. The pull between them was too strong, too intense to resist. As the concert came to an end, and the Rolling Stones performed their last number as an encore, Victor realized that the evening had ended too soon. He wanted to hold on to that feeling, that connection with Jessica, for as long as possible. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause, and Victor found himself in a whirlwind of elation and the bittersweet realization that their time here was coming to an end. Jessica looked up at him, her eyes glistening in the light of the street lamps, and he knew she felt it too. As the last notes faded into the night, Victor and Jessica slowly made their way through the crowd, their fingers still intertwined. The walk to the truck was quieter, and the atmosphere between them was saturated with the intensity of what they shared. The sounds of people laughing and talking, the distant roar of engines all seemed to dissolve into the background. Victor couldn't help but look at Jessica every few moments, each time feeling a rush of emotion that he could barely contain. Finally, they reached the truck, and Victor opened the passenger door in front of Jessica. She climbed in, her movements slower, as if she too was trying to make each moment last a little longer. Victor closed the door and walked over to the driver's seat, taking a deep breath before getting into the car. He started the engine, and they drove away from the driving range, the lights of the concert disappearing in the distance behind them. The drive back was quiet, the air between them thick with tension. Finally, Victor stopped on a deserted road, and the moonlight cast shadows on the windshield. He looked at Jessica, her face half lit by the silvery light, and she smiled at him, a smile that held 1,000 secrets. A smile that held 1,000 secrets. He reached for her, ran his hand over her cheek and his thumb over her lips. She nestled against him, her lips parted, and they kissed again, longer this time, deeper, and the world around them faded. It was just the two of them, tangled in each other, and the weight of their secret love pressed down on them, and yet they felt so incredibly right. The night seemed to drag on forever. They talked in quiet voices, sharing dreams and fears, their words filling the small space of the truck. Jessica talked about her life, her regrets, the things she wished she could change. Victor listened. His heart ached for her. He wanted to be the one who could give her the freedom she craved. He told her about his frustrations, about feeling trapped in a life that wasn't quite right for him. They were two souls, searching for something more, something they found, if only for a fleeting moment, in each other. "We can't do this," Jessica whispered when they finally pulled away and her forehead pressed against his. "I know," Victor replied, his voice barely audible, his heart aching. But even as he spoke those words, he knew he would do it again. He knew that this night, this connection, was something he could never give up, no matter what it cost him. They drove the rest of the way, back in silence, the air between them filled with unspoken words, promises they could never fulfill. When they finally reached Jessica's house, Victor walked her to the door. She stopped, turned, and looked at him, her eyes full of longing and regret. "Good night, Victor," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Good night, Jessica," he replied with a heavy heart. She slipped inside, the door closing softly behind her, and Victor stood still for a moment, feeling the coolness of the night air on his skin. He knew he should go home to Melissa, pretend tonight had been nothing more than a concert, nothing more than a fun sleepover with his mother-in-law. But as he got back into his truck and drove away, he couldn't help but smile. Because no matter what happened next, he knew that he and Jessica had something real, something strong, something that no one could ever take away from them. It was their secret, their hidden love, forged in the magic of the Texas night, under the spell of rock and roll. Victor drove slowly, replaying the events of the night in his head. The music, the lights, the touch of Jessica's hand on his arm. It was like a beautiful dream. He wondered how they would meet each other at the next family gathering, how they would hide what had happened tonight. The thought that they would see each other again, that they would meet gazes in a crowded hall, made him shudder. He knew their relationship was dangerous, but he also knew he wouldn't trade it for anything. Jessica, on the other hand, leaned against the front door, her heart pounding. She closed her eyes, her lips still tingling from Victor's kiss. She knew she was playing with fire, that she was risking everything for something that would never happen. But as she stood there, with the echo of the concert still ringing in her ears, she couldn't help but feel alive. For the first time in years, she felt truly alive. And no matter how difficult the circumstances, she knew she would hold on to that feeling for as long as she could. The days that followed passed like a blur. Victor went back to work, going about his daily business, but still carrying the memories of that night. He and Jessica exchanged glances during family dinners, their eyes speaking words they couldn't say out loud. This secret they shared was exciting and bonded them like nothing else. One afternoon, Victor found himself alone with Jessica again, this time in her kitchen. Melissa had left on business, and it was just the two of them. There was tension in the air, unspoken words hanging between them. Jessica looked up at him, her eyes filled with the same mixture of longing and regret. "We have to be careful," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know," Victor replied, stepping closer to her. He reached out, and his fingers touched her fingers. "But I can't stop thinking about you." Jessica closed her eyes, her breathing hitching. "I can't either," she admitted, her voice trailing off. "But it's impossible, Victor." He nodded with a heavy heart. He knew she was right. But as he looked at her, standing in the soft afternoon light, he also realized that, as impossible as it was, he couldn't leave. "Not now. Or maybe not ever," They froze for a moment, and the world around them faded, just as it had that night at the concert. It was dangerous. It was wrong, but it was also reality. And for the moment, that was enough. It was their secret, their hidden love, held together not only by the magic of a Texas night under the spell of rock and roll, but by the quiet moments that followed the stolen glances, the whispered words, the touch of a hand when no one was looking. It was a love that couldn't be, but it was theirs, and that was all that mattered.